This is Tech and Politics, and I'm Andreas Jungherr. Welcome back to the podcast accompanying the lecture series Digital Media in Politics and Society at the University of Bamberg. In this episode, we discuss the role of measurement in the quantification of the world. By translating observations into numbers, quantification provides opportunities for new and important insights about the world and objects of interest. But, as with any translation, making entities and phenomena countable means also losing some of their features. Quantification makes some things visible while hiding others. To better understand this process, we have to examine how things become numbers. We have to examine measurement. The statistician Hand defines measurement as, and I quote, the assignment of numbers to represent the magnitude of attributes of a system that we're studying or which we wish to describe. End quote. Today, measurement is pervasive and underlies much of contemporary life. The economy runs on data, models, and prognoses, allowing the optimization of production, the planning for inventories, or the setting of prices. States use them for policy planning, designing interventions, and the allocation of state resources. Scientists depend on data for the explanation of the world and the prediction of trends. We ourselves carry personal trackers that measure our movements or heartbeat to determine our fitness and track our training progress. This pervasiveness of measurement makes it difficult to imagine that this might have been different. But the historical roots of measurement and data are very prosaic. They lie in the late Middle Ages and start with accounting. International merchants started to rely on numbers to keep track of orders and inventory, allowing them to run intricate and far-reaching international trade networks. Soon, states started to adapt to these innovations in order to increase their ability to collect taxes and raise armies. The foundations of measurement are therefore very practical and lay at the heart of the processes that gave rise to the modern society. Looking more closely at measurement, we can differentiate between two measurement approaches: representational measurement and pragmatic measurement. On the most fundamental level, measurement can be the mapping of empirical relationships between distinct objects by quantifying specific, observable attributes. The resulting numerical relationships represent the empirical relationships between the objects. This is representational measurement. For example, we can examine the relative strength of a protest movement over time by counting participants in protest events at different points in time. If we count more participants at events over time, we can conclude that the movement gains strength over time. If we count fewer participants over time, we can infer the opposite. This type of measurement is straightforward. Numerical values assigned during the measurement process are constrained by the relationship of empirically observable characteristics. But, as we will quickly find out, most phenomena of interest, especially in the social sciences, do not lend themselves to this direct measurement approach. But to make things clear, let's define representational measurement. Representational measurement is the assignment of numerical values to variables in such a manner that the numerical relationships between variables correspond to empirically observed relationships between measured entities. This assignment is not arbitrary. Instead, it's directly informed and constrained by the patterns and properties observable in the actual entities being studied. Things become a little more difficult and interesting in the measurement of phenomena that do not lend themselves to direct observation, but that still merit quantification. The state of the economy, collective happiness, public opinion, people's psychological traits or attitudes. None of these concepts can be observed directly, but all are subject of measurement. This requires pragmatic measurement. Concepts like these do not directly map to empirically observable and directly comparable characteristics. So, to measure them, scientists have to first decide on how the concept of interest manifests in measurable signals. They have to construct the measurement, which means deciding on what the target concept is and how it should manifest indirectly in observable objects. While representative measurement is directly constrained by empirically observable properties of entities, pragmatic measurement is constrained by shared conventions among those doing the measuring, about what constitutes valid measurement approaches and their practicality in use. Let's try our hand at a definition again. Pragmatic measurement is the assignment of numerical values to variables to approximate non-directly observable concepts. This is achieved through the theoretical mapping of these concepts to empirically observable indicators. While these measurements are grounded in shared conventions and are valued for their practical utility, their validity is contingent upon the robustness of the link between the theoretical concepts and their empirical proxies. Such connections and the inference drawn from them remain subject to interpretation and critique. One example for pragmatic measurement from political psychology is the measurement of latent attitudes. For example, libertarianism is an abstract concept capturing a set of ideas about protecting the rights of individuals against the state. If we want to find out whether people agree or disagree with libertarianism, we cannot observe this directly. Libertarians share no physical characteristics, making them different from others. Egalitarians say that we could empirically observe. Instead, scientists have proposed a set of statements, each of which corresponding with some aspect of libertarian ideas or convictions. Those survey respondents who agree with these statements more strongly or consistently than others, we can label libertarians. Of course, the statements used to measure libertarianism are open to interpretation and critique, whether they truly capture the concept of interest or not. Also, we could use other ways to construct a pragmatic measurement of libertarianism. For example, we could look at digital media posts and classify them as being in accordance or conflict with libertarian ideas. Doing so would allow us to classify users as libertarians based on their propensity of posting content expressing connected statements or ideas. Pragmatic measurement is a powerful approach to examine and structure the world, especially with regard to concepts or phenomena that do not lend themselves easily to direct empirical observation. At the same time, pragmatic measurement does not only represent reality, it also constructs it by defining ways on how to measure concepts and phenomena which cannot be directly observed empirically. Accordingly, the process of defining these measures warrants close observation and critical interrogation, especially with regard to whether the proposed measures correctly and fairly represent the supposed target concepts, or whether they unfairly represent institutional, economic, or political interests. Let's spend a little time with another example. The quantification of the relative strength of factions in political competition offers examples for both representational and pragmatic measurement. The most direct way to determine the relative strength of political factions is counting votes after an election. This is a case of representational measurement. The vote count is a direct representation of the empirically determined votes in favor of either party. But although this measure has a clear and easily identifiable empirical counterpart, the interpretation of what these votes mean diverges strongly. Some will claim that the winning party has a clear mandate of exercising their platform. If not, why would people have voted for it otherwise? Others will claim that being successful at the polls does not provide any indicator that people actually support the positions of a party. They could merely have voted for it out of protest, given their opposition toward the political status quo. Still others might point out that a vote for a party doesn't speak of policy support or protest. It might simply be a tactical choice to create conditions under which parties might be forced into a coalition government. These are just 3 possible interpretations among many others. These examples are not meant to be exhaustive. They simply illustrate that even for data that are the result of a direct and uncomplicated representative approach, interpretations of their meaning diverge widely, always depending on the interests and intentions of those doing the interpreting. This is even more so with measures of public opinion. In between elections, political parties' fortunes might shift. But without votes to count, their relative strengths are hard to quantify. It is here that public opinion research comes in. Public opinion is an abstract concept with no direct empirical expression. This makes public opinion an object for pragmatic measurement. To determine public opinion at any time, people are surveyed, be it for the support of parties, assessment of politicians, or opinions on policies or political topics. While answers in these surveys can be counted, the interpretation of these numbers is open to interpretation and construction. Accordingly, public opinion surveys serve interested parties as instruments in the pursuit of their goals. The specifics in the measurement of public opinion, the sample drawn, questions asked, weighing procedures applied, and interpretations are subject for critical reflection and interrogation. The same goes for the impact of the quantification of public opinion and political will in general. Let's get back to our discussion. It is important to keep the distinction between representational and pragmatic measurement in mind. Both representational and pragmatic measurement translate phenomena into seemingly objective numbers. But, while in the case of representational measurement, these numbers are constrained by direct, empirically observable characteristics, pragmatic measurement defines what empirically observable signals are seen as an expression of underlying empirically unobservable concepts or phenomena. In the best case, this makes invisible but important aspects of the world visible and open them up for documentation, tracking over time, prediction, and targeted interventions. In the worst case, pragmatic measurement hides its interpretive and constructive characteristics behind the seeming numerical objectivity borrowed from the more narrowly empirically constrained representative measurement approach. In interpreting and critically interrogating data, we therefore need to take into account by which approach they were measured. Additionally, measurement might fail on a practical level. On a very foundational level, there is the question of a measure's validity. A measure is valid if it captures the phenomenon of interest correctly. For example, asking people to state the frequency of media use in the recent past and treating respective answers as objective would represent an invalid measurement. Personal reflections of something as ephemeral as media use cannot serve as documentation of actual media use. A measure also needs to be reliable. It needs to produce accurate, quantified representations of the empirical features of an entity. A simple example of an unreliable measure is a scale that returns wildly fluctuating weight assessments at repeated weighing of the same object. An example for the reliability of a more complicated measurement approach would be if 2 people tasked with content analysis tasks return independently from another the same content classification. Conversely, if they would fail to do so, the measure would not be reliable. There's also the issue of bias of measurements. Measures are biased if their results contain systematic errors. To stay with the example of a scale would be biased if it systematically adds or subtracts a specific value to each measurement. For example, for a more elaborate measurement approach, we can turn to public opinion surveys. A biased sampling process might lead to specific parts of the population being underrepresented among survey respondents. Accordingly, their preferences cannot be registered, which in turn leads to the return of a biased measure of public opinion. Questions of biased datasets and results of subsequent analyses have gained high relevance in the discussions about artificial intelligence and algorithmic decision-making. By relying on datasets that systematically over- or underrepresent marginal or historically discriminated groups in society risks the continuation of discriminatory or marginalizing practices into present and future by reliance on the results of seemingly objective data analyses. We will return to this issue later. Finally, we also need to consider that in some cases the measured objects react to measurements and change their characteristics. This is especially true for the social sciences. Publishing prognoses on expected economic developments will lead to people adjusting their behavior in order to profit from these developments, thereby potentially reinforcing the predicted trends or making them mute. Similarly, publishing data on the prevalence of hate speech on digital platforms can lead to the platforms adjusting their policies. This might mean filtering political hate speech at the point of publication, deleting following moderation after publication, or shadow banning it, making it invisible to all users but the author. These adjustments change the prevalence of hate speech, but also invalidate the previously used measurement approach. Quantifying entities that have the ability to react to measurement approaches and their results can therefore limit the long-term use of these approaches and present non-trivial challenges to the validity of identified patterns or predictions over time. These limitations and challenges are well understood for traditional measurement approaches, with clearly defined measurement targets and instruments. Here, we have clearly defined quality control procedures that allow to assess potential biases or reliability issues. These issues are less well understood, or even acknowledged, for newer measurement approaches, as in the work with digital media or big data. In light of this discussion about measurement, its characteristics, limitations, and challenges, we can conclude that quantification, the symbolic representation of the world in data, does not necessarily lead to an objective and correct model of the world. Instead, measurement can both on a conceptual and on a practical level introduce errors and biases, leading data to misrepresent the world and the relationship between objects of interest within it. The importance of data in contemporary society means that we need to actively account for this by actively and transparently constructing measures, as well as critically interrogating those presented by others. This is especially important in the work with new and innovative measurement approaches and data types, as for example those found on and produced by digital media. That's it for today. The next episode will focus on how we observe and shape the world through data. As always, the script to this episode can be found online on the course website, https://digitalmedia.andreasjungherr.de. There, you will find detailed sources, references to further reading, links, and preparatory questions for the exam. This was Tech and Politics, a podcast by the Chair for Political Science, especially Digital Transformation, at the University of Bamberg. I am Andreas Jungherr. Have fun reading, and see you soon.